second is I am officially being laid off as of the 29th of this month. First week of January would have made 10 years with my company. And
Wow.
the 29th will be my last day. Yeah. So, what a better way to start this topic, right? This episode,
Yeah.
everyone, is about what to do if you've been laid off. How do you face this? And we're gonna dive into some interesting things.
To our listeners, I think it's awesome that Danny's just sharing his personal story with us, right? Because I have some questions for Danny today. And this is a real life story, right? And I want this to be applicable to not just if you are being laid off actively right now, but also, what to do if you think you might be laid off, or maybe you will be in the future. You kind of see the writing on the wall. You want to start preparing now, whether you're pre-layoff or in the middle of being laid off or losing a job, or even just after it, or maybe you want to quit. Whatever your situation is, today's episode is for you. Want to give you some food for thought, some ideas to think about. And Danny, honestly, I thought, what better way to start by just walking through your situation? I mean, I have a few questions I jotted down for you today.
Okay.
I think the first I wanted to start off was, you found out you're going to be laid off in the immediate aftermath, like short term, basically. And this is brand new news, right? This just happened, what, last week?
Yeah, I received the notice about 10 days ago.
So in this short period of time, what have you been doing in the immediate aftermath to address the situation?
Well, day one and a half was kind of like a decompression time. After being employed with the company for nearly a decade, it's a bit surreal, right? In some regards.
Yeah.
So just trying to decompress and not stress too much. And then it was really trying to figure out, all right, where do I go from here? What's my plan? You
Yeah.
know, I'm kind of embarrassed to say it's been a decade since I prepared an external resume, right? I've had
Fair.
to update my resume for internal roles I've applied for, but I have not been keeping up on these kind of externally facing resumes, and didn't have a LinkedIn or anything like that. I've just kind of been in this role, in these roles with this company for such a long time. And that kind of, begs an interesting psychological question. Like, if you're in one place for such a long time, it becomes not an aspect of your personality, but it's kind of ingrained as almost like a part of your identity, right? And how do
Yeah.
you navigate adjusting and changing that and figuring out what you want to do next and what makes sense for you?
Wow. I hadn't even thought about it from that
Yeah.
standpoint. That's interesting. So remind me, how many people were being laid off?
With this, it's approximately 600 in total
Wow. So
across the
just a
entire
massive,
country. Yes,
massive group of people being laid off. Yeah.
absolutely.
Gosh. So, well, let's walk through. First of all, how many more payments are you expecting to receive? Paychecks? Are you getting any severance or anything like that? Like, what does
Okay.
that look like until basically your income completely cuts off, just
Yeah.
gone?
So, and that's another thing, right? Is thinking about income in the future. So I have a full paycheck this week. I have a full paycheck the first week of January. And again, my last official day is the 29th, so the last business day of the year. After that, I will be receiving severance, which is incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
I'll be receiving just over 4 months of severance, so 17 weeks. And that obviously is going to be very helpful in kind of getting us through this time. So it's not an immediate end of income.
That's amazing, first and foremost, that you're getting that much severance. I could imagine many people who are in a similar situation but have zero severance, right? It's just a layoff with, maybe you have, like, I don't know, a couple weeks pay or something like
True.
that. You get your
Yes.
last one or two paychecks and then you're on your own.
Absolutely.
So that definitely helps. I think as a quick shout out to our listeners, this is a great place to revisit the emergency fund episode that we did. It's in a moment like this where the emergency fund really shines.
Absolutely.
It's for this exact reason. It's one of the reasons that you have an emergency fund, is to be able to handle something like this.
How ironic. How ironic that we've been talking about the emergency fund as something to get you through one of these drastic, life events for so
Right.
many months now. And, I get to show that truly it is needed and it's helpful. Our emergency fund is one of the reasons why I am not feeling, nearly as much stress as I could be.
That's awesome to hear. Take that to our listeners. Take that as a sign of optimism, a tale of optimism, or hopeful outlook. Right. This is exactly why you save for an emergency fund, is for something like this, to not only financially get you across that gap of income until your next job opportunity comes up, but also relieve you of the psychological turmoil you would otherwise go through, right? Danny, I mean, you're in your position. That's awesome. I mean, obviously, you've spoken about this a lot, where you are very aggressive about tackling debt. You have very little to no debt to your name. That's not a drain on your cash flow that you have to keep, meeting those debt obligations, with the exception of maybe your mortgage. But on top of that, you have an ample emergency fund plus some severance. Now, to help round out your picture, though, your wife is still employed at this place, correct?
Yes, she is still employed. Thankfully, that would be far more stressful. Although I have faith, she's an amazing worker, and I have faith, and an amazing interviewer, and an amazing employee, and an amazing leader. I can't say enough good things about
Yeah.
how she is within the company. But I believe she would find something else within weeks, if not sooner,
Gotcha.
no matter where she interviewed.
Are you concerned that she may be next, or does your early temperature check give you some confidence that she might actually be secure in her job there?
I mean, I can't really speak, to that as
Mhm.
as much as I may want to, but I think that she's in a pretty good position for the
Yeah,
time being.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
So with your benefits, right, whether it's health insurance or any other type of benefits, what are you keeping and what are you losing? Kind of walk me through that.
I mean, essentially losing everything, right? The different life insurance benefits, the health insurance, all of that. Some of it will be covered and carried through Cobra for a
Okay.
couple of months, and so I'll be utilizing that. And that's one aspect that I haven't fully fleshed out yet is how that will look moving forward, say 4 months from now,
Gotcha.
when all of that additional coverage has lapsed. And that's something that's still a work in progress. Yeah, everything eventually, will be lost since it was tied to the company itself.
Yeah. So are you unable to, say, go on your wife's health insurance as like family coverage or anything like that?
That is an option.
Okay.
However, one of the benefits is the low cost of healthcare, and adding a spouse is far more expensive than even having children. So
Interesting. So you,
yeah,
you might actually be better off just staying on Cobra in your case,
correct.
or
Yes.
or maybe even going to the marketplace or something like that.
Yeah, that may
Um,
be the eventual option.
Interesting. Yeah. To our listeners, you may have noticed why I'm asking a lot of these questions. Like, these are the types of things that I'm looking for, and that I would invite you to be looking for if you're ever in a situation where you lose a job or are laid off. It's these types of things, right? Like your emergency fund, your benefits. Are you able to maintain coverage for your health insurance, things like that? Those are just some of the fundamental things to kind of keep an eye on. So, Danny, back to your wife's income then at this job. Are you and your wife able to get by on her income alone, or are you going to have to tighten things up a little bit? I mean, what does that kind of look like?
So right off the bat, I would say almost, right? If we didn't have to pay for daycare costs, we would be very close to that. We have already started tightening up, and we're cutting out expenses. Any discretionary spending is paused for the moment while we figure things out. If you thought that we had affordable eating before, boy, we have really started to stretch those dollars, buying only in bulk. We had been doing $7 for the family dinners before, and now we're looking at that lower, can we all eat for $4 a day number.
Wow.
So that is what we were trying to reach, and while still being healthy and getting in vegetables and clean protein and stuff like that. So we've kind of almost gone for no spending, right? And just eating through the food that we have stored. And we're focusing on getting those food items down first before we really look at any additional shopping.
Food is one of those really hard things that you just can't really cut much of. I mean, you have to eat, right? It's like
Yes.
one of those staple expenses. In your situation, it doesn't sound like you have mushroom to cut in your food budget?
Oh boy,
Get it?
Chris.
Mushroom.
Um,
I'm a pretty
yeah,
fun guy. What can I say?
he's a fun guy. All right.
Yep.
So yeah, not a lot of room. We were already pretty lean in that regard.
Yeah.
But we have found ways to cut it further, and we're trying to stretch every dollar just to ensure that we have a longer lasting safety net.
I mean, knowing you, I wouldn't be surprised if things really got tight. I wouldn't be surprised to see you outside, foraging, hunting your own food.
Oh,
You are quite the do-it-yourselfer, right? I wouldn't put
yeah.
it past you.
When we moved into the house, we did. I ripped up a large portion of the lawn. I never liked wasting water on
Mm.
grass in the desert, and I put down some water-resistant kind of vapor barrier and
Hmm.
drip lines underneath that, and then we planted a full garden. And for the
Wow.
first 2 summers that we were here, while we had more time during the short planting season, we solely ate out of the garden, with the exception of buying like eggs and milk at the grocery store.
Wow. That's incredible. It's like that's something that I would see somebody in the fire movement pulling right out of their playbook, like some extreme example where they, grow their own food and
Hey, you know what?
cut costs in that way.
When you're growing your own food, it truly tastes better. When
I bet.
when you
Yeah.
pull it straight, from the vine or the plant, and then you clean it and cook it in your kitchen right then. Man, those were the best dinners, the best meals.
That's awesome. So your wife's income alone is pretty close. Not quite enough, but it gets pretty close to meeting your living needs. With
Yeah.
taking that into account, how long do you think your emergency fund would last? Taking your wife's income into account, and then
Mhm.
that little bit of difference where you're not quite meeting all your living needs, how long would that emergency fund be able to fill that gap for? Do you have a sense in
The
your mind, number of
Yeah,
months or
the
years?
emergency fund plus the severance, I think, can take us about a year.
Wow,
Yeah. So,
that's
I
awesome.
admit, yes, we are in a good place in that regard, much better than many other people, and I'm
Yeah.
thankful that we've been, blessed in that regard, and that we've had the foresight and the means to create that buffer before this occurred.
Yeah, and I mean, you said earlier that you feel far less stressed than you otherwise would if you didn't have that. But I do want to ask you that question directly. How do you feel right now?
It's hard to qualify. A lot of different emotions. I feel trepidation, right? I do
Hmm.
feel some stress, a little nervous, a little excited for what this can mean for the future, right? I just got that first financial designation,
Yeah,
and I'm excited to have that done. It does mean that I can begin looking for work in the financial planning world,
absolutely.
doing things such as paraplanning work. So I'm excited for that. Again, there's a little bit of the fear of the unknown, right? It's a big change after many years of things being pretty much the same.
Yeah.
And so, there's some unknown aspect there that is a little stressful. But overall, doing okay, and
Yeah.
excited to make some big moves that have otherwise maybe been put on hold.
Yeah, I love that. I'm so glad that you used the word even a little bit excited, because that is, I want to come back to that. I really do. I think that's something worth emphasizing and exploring a little bit. Before we go forward, though, I had one more question, just to kind of help set the final stage of the context of this conversation. Do you feel like you absolutely need to be making a source of income right now? Or are you relatively comfortable with the idea that if you were doing something else productive, you would be okay not having an income at this point in time?
That's the big question, right?
Yeah.
Who's the provider? Do I have like an ethical responsibility to immediately begin earning income? And from an emotional standpoint, in some regards, I feel like, yes, I should still be bringing in income, but I am playing with the idea and researching and considering putting that on hold and attempting, future financial education full time and just going as aggressively as possible. So, to everyone listening, what that really means and what I'm thinking is that if possible, if I can find a way to balance it and make it work, is that I go into the certified financial planner program full time as aggressively as possible starting January, like January 1, basically. and getting through as much of that as I can. And then what I will do moving forward, depending on how long that takes, if money starts to get tight, then I can kind of ease off of that study and that kind of learning education time and balance that with part-time planning work.
Yeah, I think that's a phenomenal plan. I honestly don't have anything to add to that. I completely agree with you on that. In my opinion, given that you have little to no debt, that your wife is still working, and that her income alone covers most of your expenses, and that you have about 4 months of pay still before that income cuts, plus your emergency fund, which is pretty well funded, and also knowing you personally and your commitment to frugality and financial minimalism, there is no better candidate that I could think of. And like, I wouldn't give this advice very often, right? And to our listeners, take this with a grain of salt, right? We're all different people, right? This is actually directed to Danny at this point, but honestly, Danny, you're in about as good of a position as you could be to take that calculated risk where you devote your resources to focusing on the CFP curriculum, of which you are already intellectually way ahead of most people who are even embarking on it at this point in time, like going into the first courses. I think you have the silver lining to all of this is I think you have a real opportunity to really kickstart the CFP curriculum and get a head start. I mean, you might be well on your way, halfway, maybe more, by the time your severance ends. And at that point, not only will you have the FPQP designation, which you already have now, but you'll also be well along your way in the CFP program. So when you do, after your severance ends, you would be in a very attractive position if you needed to and wanted to then reach out to some financial planners or firms out there that may want to hire a remote paraplanner. That can be a really lucrative side hustle, part-time or full-time. I've even known people who have worked with a lot of small firms, one advisor, maybe one advisor and an assistant, and they're looking for a paraplanner to help with some of the behind the scenes planning and get the plans in shape. Maybe all they can do is part-time, but then next thing you know, they refer you out to another planner who's also a small firm and they need some part-time help. And so I've met paraplanners who have, many in fact, who have had multiple part-time gigs that just by word of mouth, just in the community, because as big as the financial planning industry is, it's also in many ways a very small community. A lot of people know a lot of people. And next thing you know, opportunities are right around the corner. And I think you have a lot of flexibility to really go for this with the optionality of dipping into some income if needed. But you might find as you embark on the CFP, you might just start blasting through it. I agree with you. I'm just reiterating what you said, really, and encouraging you to do that, and just keep an open mind to your comment about ethical responsibility to earn an income. I absolutely love that. I, as a spouse, and thinking about my wife, I feel that very strongly, and I resonate with that sentiment, the desire, even the absolute urge to want to be a productive person in this relationship, right? And so I get that, and I just want to reiterate something I said before on the episode we did about part-time jobs and side hustles. At the end, I talked about, you had talked about this podcast and, pursuing the CFP, and you asked if that could be considered a part-time job. Well, yes, I would even say it could be considered a full-time job. I think we have to be loose in how we define job, right? Because a lot of these things you're doing could be deferred income. In fact, there's very much the expectation that these things are going to lead to an income that's even higher than the one you were earning prior to being laid off.
Yeah, that does very much seem to be the case.
Yeah, and I think what's more important is that you are being productive with your time, and nobody can look you honestly in the face and tell you aren't being productive if you are full on pursuing the CFP curriculum. You absolutely earn my respect, and you 100% will earn the respect of every other financial planner who would even be looking at your situation and see what you're doing. There's not going to be a question in their mind of like, why isn't he working? Why isn't he looking for a job? Anybody who's done the CFP program knows how intense and challenging it is and how much time it takes. And for somebody to just throw all their time and energy at it, that's a very admirable endeavor to pursue, and it's well worth your time. And to our listeners, you may not be pursuing the CFP, but I think there's an analogous lesson to be learned here. There could be something you want to pursue. It could be a certification. It could be education. It could be additional training or learning new skill sets. I think the question to ask yourself is it something that could be really productive for my future career path? If the answer is yes, that's okay. It doesn't have to earn you an income right now. It could be getting you set up to earn more income later down the road. I know I went on a long
Absolutely. I appreciate it.
Rant there, but I thought I'd just share my honest thoughts. Yeah, I agree with everything you said, Danny, about what you did. I mean, if I tried to put myself in your shoes, right? Like, what would I do if I was laid off? And I agree with everything you've done with, cutting costs, paring down, stretching the dollar. I think those are all great tips for anybody who's in this situation. I kind of logistically speaking, zooming in, right? I would make sure that you have enough finances in order to pay your upcoming bills, right? I understand if you have an emergency fund, that takes care of that. But sometimes we underestimate how quick things are to post to our bank account in time. Like, I'm just saying there could be an awkward moment where you find out you're laid off, you're not accounting for certain bills or expenses coming up, and then you end up in a bind like really quickly after finding out you're laid off. I think that's something to be mindful of for anybody going through that. And
definitely. Yeah, I haven't done it yet, but I need to. It'll be during, some of my downtime in the next week or so. But revisiting the budget, right?
Yeah.
And removing that income and seeing, where things can be shifted and where we can optimize in order to, make that severance last longer.
Yeah, I agree. And kind of on the topic of severance, I know this is a little bit controversial, but it's worth saying to any of our listeners as well. You may be eligible for unemployment benefits. You have to check with your state. There are a lot of, strict qualifications and things like that. But to those of us who use it honestly and ethically, you have every right to do so. That is in your right to do so. I wouldn't shy away from taking advantage of something that you are entitled to. So
yeah, that's fair.
It's for your benefit, right? We all hit hard times. People lose jobs, and that's why those types of things are there, are to help bridge that gap. So definitely look into those in your state. If anyone is in a position where they are fearful that they may lose their job, check with your loan providers. Some, federal student loans, you might be able to put them on deferment until you find another job. Check with your lenders. And if you are on the healthcare marketplace, like healthcare.gov, and you have a health plan through the marketplace, you should probably adjust your income on there if you do lose your job, because then you may actually qualify for the premium tax credit, right? Like if your income ends up dropping during the year and you had previously put in an income that was anticipating you were going to work for the whole year, and then you come to find out you lose it, don't forget to check back on that, and you might be eligible for some premium tax credit.
One call out there, right?
Yeah.
You do need to be careful with the number that goes in if you then later land a job and earn more than you were expecting. Go listen to our recent episode about when you should hire a financial planner. There's a great example in that episode about what can happen if you underestimate the amount of money that you're going to earn in the year and take advantage of those tax credits.
Yeah, and then have to end up owing them all back to the IRS.
Correct.
Yeah, that's not a fun position to be in, so you have to be careful about that. Yeah, so Danny, I think to wrap up, I had 3 important questions that I would invite anybody who's thinking about this to ask themselves, right? So maybe you were just laid off, or you think you might be, or you might be quitting because whatever your situation you're in, you just really need to get out of your employment situation. So you might be going into a period of not having income. I wrote down 3 questions that came to mind. Number 1, do you have anything to show for it? This question's not meant to make anyone feel bad. It's just, don't put yourself in a position where you lose a job or quit a job and you have nothing to show for it. And this is kind of a call out to being honest with your spending and saving, setting up an emergency fund, not allowing your lifestyle creep to throw your finances off track. I have known many people myself included, who have worked for a job that I and they were miserable at for a few years and should have had some money saved up, but because we were dissatisfied with our jobs and it was easier to spend for short-term relief, to deal with not being happy or fulfilled, next thing you know, you spent all this time at some place you don't like, and then you quit or are laid off and you have nothing to show for it. It's one of the worst feelings in the world. And so, cautionary tale, start setting aside some money in an emergency fund, paying off your debts, have something to show for it. If you're going to suffer through a job you don't like, you might as well take advantage of that income while you have it and get yourself ahead so that you can then pursue something even better beyond that. Set yourself up for success, because if you start off on the wrong foot looking for something else you want, it's going to be that much harder to overcome that. Not that you were unhappy, Danny, but some people who are laid off or quit their jobs or whatever the situation is, some people do not like their position. And so,
Very true.
when you said that earlier, like even a little bit excited, you having an emergency fund and having something to show for it is going to make you that much more able to embrace that excitement and just go for it, right? Like, imagine if you were in a situation where you still had lots of consumer debt and hardly any emergency fund. That would be a much different story, much different situation.
Absolutely. So, yeah.
Yeah.
You'd be making a lot of phone calls to a lot of debtors and trying to get those payment plans in place and worked out.
Yeah. The second question I wrote down is actually what you said earlier about being kind of excited. And my second question was this: is it actually a bad thing that you lost your job? Is it actually bad?
Well,
right?
I know what you're getting at. And I would say that, the future remains to be seen. My hope is no. Essentially, this has simply accelerated a concept and a plan that my wife and I, had been developing, and we're hoping to roll out in stages over the next 1 to 2 years. This is kind of, a little kick in the pants, and we're trying to view it as just kickstarting me on a more aggressive path than I had otherwise planned on.
Yeah.
And all of these thoughts and the idea of going full time into education and utilizing that time of severance in order to make these aggressive plans to come to fruition, that was not made in a vacuum. That those decisions and that plan have been laid out, speaking with you, speaking with other friends and family that are in the finance world or finance adjacent, discussions with my wife, to make sure that we're both on board and thinking the same thing, and that we can, we have a shared plan and a roadmap that we're both going to work towards. So consider all of your options before you, make any decisions.
Yeah. And to the question of, is it actually a bad thing? I mean, part of that is in the spirit of optimism, like seeing the silver lining, that type of thing. But part of it is also in the spirit of being objectively true. For lack of a better way of saying that, it may actually be the case in some situations where losing a job could be one of the best things that ever happened to you.
True.
Because, a lot of people, myself included, it's easy to get very comfortable and just stick to the status quo. And to use your words, sometimes you need a kick in the pants.
Yeah.
Not that you do, but
there's another quote that people use: better the devil you know than the devil you don't, right? We all get comfortable, and we like comfort. We like familiarity.
Yes.
And it's change and unknown that's difficult to face and difficult to deal with.
Yeah, but sometimes with that change and the unknown comes opportunity that was even greater than what you had to begin with. I think for this question I just said, it's the goal with that is not to make people blindly optimistic or to only think about the good. I do invite people to be pragmatic and have a realistic approach, right? It is okay to acknowledge that bad things happen to good people, right? They do all the time. Bad things happen to perfectly good people all the time. But sometimes there are opportunities to be aware of that actually present themselves during those moments. So the third question, final one, and we've talked about this a bit now, Danny, but what can I do right now to truly be productive with my time? I think the word is productive, right? And I emphasize with truly be productive with your time. And I jotted down, like, focus on the highest priority thing, right? First principles thinking here. what is the most productive thing one could do with their time if they are laid off? For some people, it might be to get another source of income coming into their bank account as fast as possible. A lot of that's going to
Sure.
depend on your personal financial situation. But in your situation, Danny, that may not be the highest priority. It is
Yeah,
a high priority, but it may not be
absolutely.
the highest priority.
I will
Right.
admit, one of the last things I want to do right now is just take the first thing that comes along. With this event having happened, I do not want to settle,
Right.
right? I want to move on to something bigger and better, and that fuels my passion. And so that's will certainly be a focus in the coming months.
Ah, that's awesome. I think that's a great place to end right there. Yeah. Danny, thank you so much for just being candid and open about your experience.
You're very welcome.
It's awesome to hear you talk about it. And to our listeners, really hope that you got something out of this. And hearing me and Danny talk through this, take this as an example of how you might apply a similar situation to yourself, right? A lot of what Danny and I spoke about would be the similar situation or conversation that we would have with you as well. Think about things we said, think about your situation, and revisit the fundamentals. Take this as an opportunity to get your goals aligned with what matters. Find that next step forward. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you in the new year.